Guys, intro time.
Wait, which intro?
The wisdom check.
Oh, good.
Wait, no. I thought we were keeping the old intro. What's wrong with the old one? People like that one.
It was too long.
Yeah.
Too many fucking gifs.
Yeah.
But can we keep the part where I yell more?
No.
But it's the intro to end all intros.
I got like what? 2 lines last time?
Do you want more lines, Tim?
Well, no, not really.
In a world without answers.
Yeah.
Wait, do you want to start with that?
Here we go, exactly like last time.
Wait, okay, so we're doing it the exact same way? Let's start with Smoky Bar.
No. It's a new season. We have to have a new intro.
More.
Not sure why we thought this would go any differently.
Oh, well. Welcome, everyone, to the Wisdom Check, where Jeff and Dustin welcome a guest every week to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Welcome.
This is ridiculous. I'm starting the stream now.
Wait, where's my die at? Well, we can't start until I botch, and it's not an intro unless I botch it.
You're on.
All right, long transition aside, I think we are live.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Wisdom Check. It is another Monday night. I am Dustin, and we've gotten over some tech issues here tonight to be able to bring Rich Dansky to the show. So welcome, Rich.
Thank you for having me here.
And over there, positioned on the other side of the screen with his fancy green screen technology, is Jeff. So, Jeff, say hello to everybody tonight.
Why, hello, everyone, tonight. I appreciate you all coming to join us tonight, because this is going to be a good one.
All right. So, for those who've been here on the Wisdom Check for quite a while, you know, we have talked extensively about the World of Darkness. Me and Jeff have a long history with LARP, Mind's Eye Theater. We have a long history with Vampire the Masquerade. And we also have dabbled a time or two in a game called Wraith the Oblivion, which is another one of the World of Darkness games, and attributed largely to the work of Rich Dansky here. So, Rich, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about how you got maybe into just TTRPGs in general, and then how you got to work in the industry itself.
Sure. I was very lucky in that I had a very supportive mother who wanted me to play tabletop role-playing games. She thought it would help my imagination. So she would buy any tabletop role-playing supplement she saw and bring it home for me, which meant I had the weirdest collection of supplements you can imagine.
All the supplements under the core rules.
None of the core rules. The James Bond storyteller screen from Victory Games. Something like that I had it. But I finally found a group of like-minded souls to play with, and we played everything under the sun. Long-running Villains and Vigilantes campaign, long-running Elric / Stormbringer / Hawkmoon / you name it.
Mm-hmm.
Short-running Call of Cthulhu campaigns because, well, you don't have long-running Call of Cthulhu campaigns.
Facts.
In college, I ran a V&V game for 4 years, which we had, I think, 35 players at one point, which made rolling for initiative something of a task. But
Did you say 35?
it was a crowded room.
Was it an auditorium? Like, what the hell?
That's straight up.
Not everybody showed up every session, but it was a sort of a rotating cast. You had the core membership, and then you had,
That's incredible. Yeah, that essentially is a LARP. So maybe that's where LARP came from. It's just, we got to figure something out here, folks. It's got way too many of you. So, like, go in a random room over there and we'll sort it out.
It was an interesting campaign. But I also did a lot of LARPing in college with a group called Quest. And one of the other questies was Jennifer Hartshorn, who went down and was the initial developer for Wraith. A lot of the core work is her work. She did a fantastic job on it. And when she moved over to Vampire, she had hired me for some writing on Wraith, and I'd also done some Changeling. And when there was an opening on Wraith, she recommended me for it.
Oh, nice.
And I was lucky enough to get that. and careen down the East Coast from Boston to Atlanta and start pulling all-nighters immediately.
Man, that's a beautiful story. Like, yeah, it's an interesting transition too, because like Wraith is pretty unique in what it's doing. It stands apart from a lot of the other games that we've come across. Maybe it kind of picks up a little bit of the Cthulhu aspects in there, of that kind of horror aspect of it, and kind of plays a little bit, I guess, with the insignificance of an individual on some levels. But I always found the concepts that were played with to be really interesting in Wraith. In particular, I found that the shadow stuff, like how that play worked around the table was really interesting. So I don't know if people in our chat are really familiar with Wraith. I'm sure, obviously, we have a couple people that are super fans in the chat. But maybe there's some people here that haven't come across Wraith before. Can we get like maybe a little introduction?
Sure. The basic premise of Wraith is that you're dead and you've got unfinished business to take care of. That business takes the form of passions and fetters. Passions are things that you have to do to sustain your ghostly existence. Fetters are the things that you're tied to in the mortal world. But ghosts have been hanging around for literally thousands of years, have built their own society, and in addition to dealing with the mortal world and trying to take care of your business there's a whole other side to existence where these ancient, powerful wraiths have built up an empire, and you need to survive in that as well.
Yeah, it's a beautiful setting. Because, unlike the rest of the World of Darkness, it sees a lot of crossover. This is one that kind of, lived in its own turf. Obviously, there aren't a lot of people hanging around after they're dead. So, unless you had necromancy or something dealing with spirits, you weren't dealing with the wraiths. And so they kind of got to play in their own little playground and deal in a way that it really felt personal. Like, all the stories that I've seen of Wraith, it's very deeply personal. And I think that's a beautiful element to bring a small table together. Would you say there's an optimal size of party for that?
4 to 5 was my best luck running Wraith. And I always found that was, with good shadow players, the best way to go. The shadow, for folks who don't know, is the dark side of Wraith's personality. It is normally played by another player in the group. And this had the practical effect of making sure that when the party split up, everybody was still playing. And the role-playing effect of having to make deals with the devil and fight your own worst enemy, who is yourself, while you're trying to accomplish things.
Yeah, and that's oh, go ahead.
That's really unique. That's really one of the unique things about Wraith that really stuck out to me the few times where we delved into it, was this idea that the dark side of your character, you make it and then literally hand it to somebody else. and then someone else is handing you theirs. And so if you got 5 or 6 people at a table, everybody has their character and then half of someone else's character that they get to also take on. So there's a level of, I guess, interaction between players you just don't see with a D&D or any of the other normal fantasy games. So was that something you guys
talked
about when you were developing this?
Yeah, obviously, those rules were set when I came on, but I did a lot of exploring of what the shadow meant and how the shadow could be played in the Shadow Player's Guide, which was one of my favorite books to work on. And the idea of shadow, just the trust between players that it had to engender, I think was really important.
Yeah, I think that did a lot for the players because, for most people, you play a game and you're sitting there waiting for your turn at the table. You're showing off what you can do. Maybe you're more of a team player and you're working with your group, but it's very rare that you have somebody else's fate completely in your hands, and that can go really badly in the wrong hands. So, I think it creates a really unique, intimate experience at that table. And I don't know that I know any other game like that. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there's another game.
I was trying to think. I can't think of any either that I've ever played. But I'm surprised that this concept didn't make its way into the other World of Darkness games. with the vampire beast, with the werewolf in frenzy, with these situations where these characters, and one of the things that's unique, I think, well, not unique, but that is that ties all the World of Darkness together is that your characters have this tendency to lose control of themselves in some way, shape, or form. And with Wraith, it's the one where they really split it up. Like I said, you give this other half to someone else. I'm surprised that concept never, through other editions, didn't pass along into the other games because it's so cool.
I've always thought it was one of the strongest elements of Wraith, and I liked it, again, for the level of trust when you had good players going, them balancing the needs of the party versus the needs to sabotage the party, what always made for an interesting calculus and made for some fantastic role-playing. I'm not surprised, honestly, that it didn't expand to a broader range of game lines, simply because it required so much trust, and it required so much introspection, and with that in mind, you really had to, I won't say be careful with your players, but you had to make sure that your players could trust one another.
Yeah, it was a big one for developing maturity at the table, and not maturity in like the edgy way of like I like dark nasty stuff, but like legitimate maturity where you're dealing with sensitive topics and dealing with them respectfully. It's we got a couple questions popping up the chat here. We'll get to here in just a second. Yeah, I totally lost the question I was going to ask because I looked over at the bright spot.
What I was going to follow up and comment and say is that in the modern day of TTRPGs, they've created systems now to help, I guess, protect that trust at the table. There's guidelines, veils, lines, those sorts of things. Things that I know back when we played Wraith and Vampire, like those things weren't things that were really ever talked about much. So it's interesting at the time that these games were being written when you guys were putting these out. That do you think that those games maybe helped bring about some of what we see today as the standard for safety for tabletop RPGs?
I would hope so. I would hope that what we did and what we explored gave people the wherewithal to look at building those and pushing past just the normal, okay, let's go into a dungeon and wreck the local ecosystem.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
to really think about what was happening at the table and make sure that everybody's in a comfortable and safe place.
There was definitely, I know for us, like a learning curve when we first got into World of Darkness coming from D&D, because it is such a different style of world that you're playing in. And not just because it's a modern, realistic set, well, for us in the 90s at the time we were playing, but, but just what you said as you're doing as a group, that the group mentality versus what a group of vampires or wraiths, what they're doing is so different, in the way that everything in the World of Darkness, no matter which one of the sub games you're playing, is always reattached to some sort of human element to it, more so than what you get with high fantasy. And so, yeah, I mean, it delves right into those sensitive topics a lot of times where you don't even know you're heading that direction at first, and then boom, suddenly you find yourself there. And I think Wraith, because they're so tied to passions, and that's all that's left that keeps them literally existing. Like, do you feel like that is really where the strength of Wraith then comes in, maybe even amongst other World of Darkness games?
I would say so. It is such a personal game, and at the same time, it is honestly the most hopeful of the World of Darkness games, because there is a way out. There is a chance to resolve your passions and fetters. There is a way to achieve transcendence and go to a better place that you don't necessarily have in the other World of Darkness games. The curtain's coming down for the werewolves. The curtain's coming down for the vampires. Right. But you personally, as a Wraith, have the opportunity to set things right. You've got a second chance. The odds are stacked against you, but you have that opportunity, no matter how slim it seems, and you can go from there.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, and when you think of like the afterlife, you typically, don't think of like hopeful storytelling, but that's exactly it. You're diving into what makes that person who they are and getting to the full expression of that individual. And
there's a liberating part to it, because I think Wraith, and you could say maybe this about Vampire, but I would argue it's not true about Vampire even. Wraith is the only game where at character creation you have to kill your character.
Yeah, fair.
And normally in most TTRPGs, regardless of which one you're playing, with superheroes, whatever, a lot of times the goal is to just simply not die. It's to find a way out of it, to come out of it ahead with some more gear, whatever, whatever. But Wraith, you're already dead. So existing is all you've got left in this other form. So once you've already released the idea that your character is dead, like, it opens up a whole new world of things that you now get to consider that are technically, I guess, worse than death. And there's a lot of fates that a Wraith can succumb to that's worse than their actual death that you wrote. So why don't we talk a little about just some of the things that can happen to a Wraith in this world?
Well, there's always the biggie, Oblivion, which is the gnawing void, the manifestation of entropy, the one place on the Wraith map you really don't want to go is the mouth of the void. And that infects Wraiths with their shadows and turns them into specters, which is another bad way to go. Specters are Wraiths that have gone over to the dark side and generally don't have too great a lifespan, but while they are kicking around, they cause a lot of havoc. And then there's soul forging, where as a Wraith you can get hammered into an inanimate object, most famously an ashtray. And
that's not a good fate.
well, I don't know if you remember Sam Haight.
Rings a bell, yeah.
Yeah.
Sam Haight was an Uber character who wandered through the various bits of continuity.
Oh, yeah.
He was a skin changer or something. Was he a skin dancer? Is that the one I'm thinking of?
Yeah, and finally I got my hands on him and I turned him into an ashtray to make sure he couldn't bother anybody else.
Now we know who's responsible for that.
Boy, that is a veteran move from our LARP days, man. You get one of those item cards that came from one of those cities that just rubber stamped all the wrong things. You come up to your desk. All right, there you go.
Someone just recently, I can't remember if it was Jonesy from Untold Stories Project. He's running Werewolf, and I think he was using Samuel Hype or something, or he was telling us he was going to.
Yeah, I remember that.
It came up recently, I think, when we were discussing Samuel Hype. So it's always great. That's one thing about the World of Darkness. They do have these characters that are very famous in the lore, and they do make their way through the various game canon, I guess, if you want to call it that. So.
Well, the lore is deep. It's a beautiful part of the game. We do have a couple questions here from the chat, Wisdom Check Redemption. So Leviathan wants to know, why so many Arcanoi and guilds?
Largely because that's what you can do as a ghost in the fiction. The way vampires derive from the vast body of vampire fiction, Wraith was derived from the vast body of ghost stories. And honestly, there's more ghost stories than vampire stories.
Makes a lot of sense.
That's true. That makes
sense. So it was looking to what was done that people associated with ghosts, and then trying to put that into a place where people could play it.
Makes a lot of sense. Let's see. We got a long one here from Joker, who I believe is who put us in contact with you to begin with. So Joker is saying, it's not a question, but hey boss, Crowley here. Just wanted to thank you since Wraith showed up in a dark moment of my life and I kind of needed the perspective from the game. That Wraith, it's about hope. Also, thanks for being so open to touch subjects that no one did back in the day, such as carnal houses of Europe.
Glad to have been there in a bad moment for you, man. And thank you for spreading the word and keep it up.
Yeah, he's singing from the rooftops, the World of Darkness content for sure. So it's been a cool one for us.
Let's get a little into some of this. Like you said, Wraith comes from a lot of the lore of various ghost stories throughout different cultures. This, that, the other, which has created all those different Arcanoi and guilds and all this sort of stuff. But the world of Wraith takes place in what's called Stygia, and it's kind of a city of sorts, correct?
Mm-hmm. It is the city where all the great cities of the world that have been burned and destroyed and knocked down have gone to their final resting place. It is an amalgam of all the great cities of the world. Excuse me. I missed
So as civilizations fall, like Stygia gets like a new suburb addition to
exactly. Yes, it's set on an island, and it is built on in layers upon layers. As buildings go down, they get hauled off to Stygia and resurrected. And it is a fascinating concept, and one that I always had a lot of fun with. Just layers upon layers of this island.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's never a shortage of things to discover, and it's true of a lot of old cities as well. Like if you think of not necessarily an old city, but Chicago. If you look at any of that, it's just city on top of city on top of city, layered like that, and you can see a lot of history in there. And for something like Wraith, being able to touch on these various aspects, you can kind of travel through time almost just by digging down. I think that's a really strong storytelling aspect.
And you had the people who made those civilizations there as well. You could reach back into history and bring back pretty much anyone you wanted as a Wraith, and have them there, have them be in the moment. They may be cranky about it, but
True. And I think this is one of those, Wraith in particular was one of the World of Darkness best in terms of getting a player to think of story and role-playing more so than, power fantasies and the like. Like, I think, from other games we were touching on before, like Dungeons & Dragons, that sort of thing, there's a tendency to want to win, to figure out the solution to the game. And I don't think that was ever an idea for Wraith. I mean, you were mentioning that there's hope for a good outcome, but I think when you sit down for a Wraith game, I think your perspective is different. Like your goals of the system are different. It's more about telling that story and discovering who your characters are and how they'll interact with one another and the world around them. And if you're doing all that stuff, that's when you're doing it right.
Mm-hmm. And you had so many axes of characters to interact with along. You had the guilds, you had the factions, you had your archetypes, and so all of those went into the bubbling broth that was every single circle, and made for interesting character interactions. The other side of the coin is, of course, that the setting was so broad. You could get nitty gritty. Mean streets, down and dirty with the Shadowlands. Deal with humans. You could do high fantasy in the Tempest. You could do political games a la Vampire with Stygia. You could pretty much touch any point in between. And so having that flexibility allowed people to really find their own path in a way that some games didn't necessarily allow for.
Right. And that was what I was going to bring up next, was that people, when they talk about politics with the World of Darkness, they immediately flock to Vampire. Vampire is just known for the politics, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, that is definitely its wheelhouse. But I can make a strong argument that Wraith, because of the way that it's set up with Stygia, and with very much the same way the Vampire set up, all these ancient wraiths that still are there that run these factions and these guilds, and you get brought in as just like a neonate does in Vampire and thrown into the bottom rung and used and abused by some of the higher ups. Like, it's got that same level power structure that Vampire has. So it's been interesting that people don't maybe turn to Wraith more often for a political game, because unlike Vampire, where it's all about not having final death, like, it's got all those same aspects.
It has those same aspects, and throwing the shadow into a political game always makes things particularly interesting. But I don't think Wraith was never exclusively political. The focus was never politics. It was there as a choice if you wanted it.
Yeah, in chat they're saying Wraith is more like being a Carthaginian type of politics, where Vamp is more Gothic. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, it's and I think that's like you're saying. There's a lot of pick what you want to do in Wraith. Like, do you want to tell ghost stories in like the traditional sense? That works. You want to tell like in a high stakes adventure game, you can do that. If you want to do political scenes like you're saying, you can do that. But But I think no matter what you do with it, though, I think it does come back down to that interpersonal kind of component. Like even when we saw it in a LARP style, you know, the community was smaller. They were kind of attached to the vampire LARP we were playing. They were like one floor above us. And like, you know, they would all do all their stuff, you know, on their own. And every once in a while we'd see them, you know, pop down the stairs and, you know, tell us what they were up to. But, you know, their community was super tight. It was, and I think that's just the natural outcome of just how the game is structured.
I would think so.
What's that? You both are talking.
No, Giovanni, bad.
Yes, Giovanni. Yeah,
it was always the Raid players and the 2 Giovanni players hanging out with them the whole night.
Yep.
You know, that was...
Yeah, that's true. God, the crossovers are rough.
Well, that's what they did the Risen, so it could be a little rough going the other way.
Oh, nice. Well, so we've been touching a little bit on LARP here. You also were involved with Mind's Eye Theater, which was the rule system that was used for LARPing, and that's pretty cool. I'm kind of curious what the original thinking was of how to translate the tabletop experience into a LARPing setting.
Well, that was Ian Lemke and Mike Tinney, and they did the original Mind's Eye Theater. And for the first few years that Mind's Eye Theater was published by White Wolf, it sort of bumped along in various box sets and books, and there was no real oversight. So you had different rules in different books that contradicted each other, and you had to go hunting in various books which were largely out of print to find rules that you needed for your games. And it was, as a player, I found it to be a little bit unsightly. And it all sort of came to a head when I went out to a convention in Kansas City, and I was invited to take place in their LARP. And I said, okay, right, I have access to all the rules. I'll bring all the books. And I spent the entire evening galumphing around with 8 books under my arm, and all I got out of the game was a sore shoulder. And I thought, there's got to be a better way than this. What we really need is a pocket-sized rules guide that makes everything uniform, that makes everything play together nicely. And that's where Laws of the Night came from. And I went back to White Wolf headquarters and asked very nicely if they would let me do an additional book on my schedule, and they said, "You're insane." And I kept on hammering at it, saying it would take no new writing fees and very little new art, so we could do it on the cheap. And people are going to really want this. And eventually I wore the Wick brothers down. So they decided to do the book, and then I actually had to go ahead and do it, which was
still
an exercise in hair pulling.
I believe that. There's a lot of difficult decisions to make with that, just because what works at a table doesn't necessarily work in a LARP setting. You know, there's a different focus on attention. Obviously, when you have bigger numbers of people, you have a focus on a larger pool of potential combatants, say in a combat, which apparently you have experience with 35 people at a table. So maybe that comes back into it.
LARPing become natural.
Yeah, but the need for streamlining things and making it easy, to get around was probably a big part of that. One of the main focuses, I would imagine.
And to make it as easy as possible to play, so you had to resort to the rules as few times as possible. That was the goal. And when you had to resort to the rules, okay, flip, here it is. Easy resolution, away we go. And so that was my main contribution to Mind's Eye Theater, and it's I'm very proud of it, actually, because I think it rejuvenated Mind's Eye Theater and allowed us to do the other lines for Mind's Eye Theater for LARPing, and really expanded the world of Vampire LARP in a way that it wasn't doing at the moment.
Well, I'm trying to remember what year that book came out. I mean, that was right at the end of the 90s, right? Or was that in the 2000s?
That was in the 90s.
Yeah, I thought so.
That was 96, I want to say.
Yeah, okay.
That sounds about right.
Oh, got somebody to ban in the chat there. Air Laser, can you grab that for us?
It happens every week now. I
Give him the
swear.
boot. Awesome. The joys of streaming sometimes.
Well, I mean, I know that it was just in the design of the book was fantastic. You said it was a smaller book. It was, at least the copies of it I ever saw were all paperback. They weren't like a hardback book, which at the time you think like, oh man, when you want a hardback, what you want to, but like when you have to carry these things around on you while you're LARPing, it's a different experience. And so the design of the book was just intended for the way that LARPs are ran. And I think just even with the way the book was constructed, put together, like you said, really, it really did enhance like the way that LARPers were then able to move around in their space they had and to interact in the way that they could. And it still, the rules were kind of, they were there, but it was still about being able to push that role play aspect of it, which is so important in the World of Darkness, like you said, versus a more higher fantasy like D&D style game. You started with in your LARP that you started out in originally was more high fantasy based, or was it kind of a precursor for what you saw for Mind's Eye Theater?
It was high fantasy. It was at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and we had folks from Yale and folks from University of Hartford and folks from the local community, and it was running around the woods and beat the crap out of each other with plumbing supplies. But we also got really into props. We really got it heavily into storytelling. We had over 100 people at our games, and the idea was to make it a weekend-long experience or an evening-long experience there, where you didn't have to have a storyteller looking over the shoulder of every single player all the time, because that, with the numbers we had, that just was impossible.
Right.
And that, more than anything else, is what I took with me to Mind's Eye Theater. Like, okay, what can the players do by themselves? Make the players self-regulating, make them able to adjudicate on their own so that they don't have to look to a higher authority every time they want to do something. And that, I think, freed up a lot of the play in Mind's Eye Theater.
Yeah, and it was greatly appreciated from the ST side of things, I'll tell you that.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure.
Welcome.
Boy, thank you.
Okay.
And it's a lot of the subtle things that the rules did. By making it streamlined and simple, you allowed people to get more into their costuming, I think. Because you don't have people lugging stuff around that they have to carry and bags of dice and stuff. And that was a big difference. And
just using rock, paper, scissors and not having to have anything other than the book on you. Like I said, that was the design of it was just so great for LARP, like the initial ones. I know some later versions of Mind's Eye Theater for other vampire versions down the road, eventually you did have to carry a die around with you and a little thing to roll on. But at least those original ones, like I said, they were the rock, paper, scissors method, and the rule sets and the way that was all designed was just fantastic for trying to create a LARP setting. I much prefer it to the newer one.
Yeah.
I'm glad you got joy out of it. That really does my heart good to hear. I always came to my work at White Wolf as a player. I had played Vampire pretty ferociously long before I came down to White Wolf. I had a campaign and back home during summers. I had a campaign in Boston where I was going to grad school. And so I always approached everything that I could from the perspective of, what do I as a player want to see from this book? What do I as a player need to get in terms of information? And what do I as a player need to help me play this game with the minimum of friction?
Yeah, we got a lot of players in the chat here that I know were involved heavily in the Chicago vampire LARP scene, so that's they're sending their love to you as well. As
he notes, we spent a decade of our lives
easily
our Fridays pretending to be vampires, like we. So it was our Friday night, like it was our social club and our social thing we did. So like I said, it was and it largely great. And we've said this on the Wisdom Check, I know at least 20 to 30 times, like it greatly impacted the way that me and Jeff tell our stories for tabletop games now too.
Mhm.
And the way we approach just any TTRPG has been so drastically altered by our LARP experience. So we definitely owe all that to you and the other people who helped create those books that allowed those LARPs to take place. So it's like I said, I know it's really, really reformed the way we approach those games, even from when we played our original vampire tabletop games before we got into LARP. So.
Yeah, 'cause
Cool.
it takes a different character entirely, I think. You know, when you're dealing with just the people at your table, you know, the focus is there, the stage is set for just you, and you still have that kind of theme park kind of aspect where the storyteller's focusing just on you and sending you somewhere to go do a thing. Whereas in the LARP setting, there's a lot more, like you said before, autonomy. And so you have to kind of create your own story. And that really kind of pushed that element. You know, I don't know if that was a intentional design element or if that was just kind of something that naturally comes out of the structure of a LARP. But it felt to me that like you ended up with a lot more player agency, I guess would be the word, in the decision-making processes.
I think it's a 50-50. That it's something that comes naturally out of LARP, just from the size of a LARP game. But we certainly made sure that the rules greased the skids for that sort of behavior.
Mm-hmm. Now, were there any elements in the construction of the book that you found to be harder to adapt than others? Like, obviously, you got translations of disciplines for vampires and things along those lines. But were there any particular that you just found were just hard to translate over?
I could never get my head around Mage LARP. So I.
Yeah. It's hard to get your head around Mage in general sometimes.
Yes, true.
Part of it.
The joke was I wisely teleport to Saturn, and really can't simulate that in a LARP. So I sidelined that. I had some difficulty finding someone to take on Changeling until Peter Woodworth showed up. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're familiar with Pete. He's a great guy and a spectacular author. But he was in high school, and he mailed me a complete manuscript for Changeling LARP.
Oh, wow. In high school? Wow. Mm-hmm. I'm getting there early.
And I read it. This works. This shouldn't work, but it works. And so he got some extra credit that quarter at school.
That's incredible.
In addition to a pension contract.
Man, I guess that goes to show.
Who knows anything else done in his classes for that quarter, right?
Goes to show. Take a chance. You never know. If you put the work in.
A fair amount of time scribbling notes on the sides of paper when I was supposed to be taking notes in class. So, I'm sure it happened to all of us.
It's got the "See, Mom" story.
Oh, true story. True story. So you also did some work on Dark Ages Vampire, which is another kind of departure from the standard model. And we did some of that at our table as well. I ran a game of that in high school, and it was a lot of fun. And it's fascinating because you look at the setting, the times, and when you don't have technology in the picture, it suddenly changes the world, like in a drastic way, in terms of the scope, like who's around you, like how far communication can really travel, how much a vampire could really get away with, and what sorts of things would make sense in those settings that wouldn't make sense in a modern day era. Like, I think that was a really cool place to explore, like, cultures and religions and, like cults and like all kinds of those things that are deep elements of history that oftentimes, the average high school kid is not reading about.
Yeah, no, I had a lot of fun working on Dark Ages. I sort of flocked to the religious angle of the game because I had a real hook for the original Gothics, which are novels like The Monk and Melmoth, which had all this tortured religiosity. And I thought this is something really cool to play with, and I took that and grabbed it wholeheartedly and put it in La Sombra, and then I got the chance to do it more actively with Vampire: The Dark Ages, and you're sort of putting civilization on sliders there. On one hand, you can get away with a whole lot more because you are the monster, and there's no one else around to stop you. On the other hand, the food source is scarcer, the hide are scarcer, so it's a balancing act.
Absolutely.
And I think, if I remember correctly, does Dark Ages predates the Camarilla Sabbat split up, correct?
Yes.
So, and that's one of the major big political differences when you play Dark Age, is that you don't have that infighting necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, you get to see why they developed in the first place.
There's plenty of infighting. It's just
sure
more localized.
But it was, I think, maybe for a lot of us that played Vampire, it was that first opportunity where you got access to, as you said, like La Sombra, Tzimisce, those clans that were kind of taboo to get to play in most Vampire games because they were on the wrong side of the war. You know, they were. So was it? I know. I guess maybe because you're dealing with a time where, the way we think of vampire lore, they were more commonly thought of as existing. I guess maybe in the Dark Ages, that's where a lot of the myth comes from. Was from that time period. So maybe they were a little more free to be vampires in that setting, maybe versus a modern setting. Would that be
a little more prominent, certainly? Yeah, and it was always funny just watching the way the demographics of games broke out, and you'd have the guys writing in with their 4th generation Bali Tremere crossbreeds who are actually werewolves, and
yeah, come across them, that's for sure. Oh.
the Sombra Anti-Tribute who formed a bowling team, and
yeah, I could. You get that perfect strike every time. We got another question from Joker, it looks like. So, speaking of historical settings, of all the settings that Wraith could have tackled, what made you guys decide to go with the Great War?
Wraiths in biplanes shooting each other down. That image was so cool that it single-handedly sold the project.
Because that's what you need, right? Is that like 5-second pitch to like sometimes get a project pushed through? So is that what you walked in with?
That is what I walked in with. And all the credit goes to Ed Hall for doing a great job on that book, and for looking at some of the deeper themes that people might not have noticed originally. Looking at colonialism, looking at the global aspect of the war, and doing just an amazing job with that.
And I mean, not to mention that, I mean, it's an event where a mass amount of race would have been created.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, if you're going to deal with Wraith, you got to have an event that's going to, on a global level, really populate Stygia pretty heavily.
Yeah. If I had a second choice, it would have been Rome.
Yeah, that'd be a good
Fall
setting.
Rome,
but just the idea of phantom biplanes shooting each other down over the Tempest was just too cool.
Now, was there a certain amount of, when you were considering, like with Rome is kind of tied a little to the Camarilla, the Fall of Vampires. Did you kind of stay away from certain time periods because they were already kind of used in maybe a different game here or there?
That was part of it. And World War I was something that nobody else was touching. And so, but I saw the potential there for doing something really cool. And hopefully folks enjoyed it. Again, Ed did a great job with that book, and I thought it was a spectacular setting and a great place to play in.
Totally. Definitely agree. And let's see. It's interesting too, because, by stepping to World War I as opposed to World War II, you don't deal in like completely trodden earth, like you got new stories to be told, maybe something that people haven't seen on TV consistently. And it's it's maybe more nuanced in a way. You know, there isn't such a crystal clear. There's one side that's, you know, atrocity laden everywhere you look, and so you have more complexity at play maybe in the First World War. Mm-hmm. And it's just a cool idea too. I mean, if you think about all the passions and drives and things that would have been going at that time, you know, like the unresolved life aspects, it just works. Like, it is just a great decision point there. See, in chat, of course, we got people saying, yeah, fucking Tremere, as apparently the most hated of all in the chat. Yeah, that was one actually I was gonna ask you. Obviously, there are many ways to butcher the pronunciation of various clans, and I have no idea how Zmisi are supposed to be pronounced. We've had multiple pronunciations in our group. I am sure they're wrong, but they are stuck in my head now as the canon. So, is there a correct one? And do you know it?
I'm sure there is one, but nobody ever told me what it was.
Nice.
Now, irony is, if I remember the books correctly, it had the enunciation next to it, and people still couldn't figure out which way it was supposed to be said, even with the like dictionary, you know, italicized, all that stuff.
I think it was supposed to be Simiche, but
oh, wow.
If you pronounce that slightly off, you get a type of carrot soup.
Huh. All right. God, maybe Joker. You know, maybe it is like saying Cthulhu. You're not supposed to actually be able to pronounce anything. That makes sense.
According to Lovecraft, you're supposed to stick your tongue to the roof of your mouth and say "Clulu." I did my thesis on Lovecraft. I know more than I want to about.
Oh, wow. Well, there you have it. That's how it's done. Man, that is an interesting territory to dig into.
Mm-hmm.
There's some crazy stories in there. Like, I wasn't really well versed until like relatively recently, and I wouldn't say I'm well versed, but you know, I come across some of the short stories. They're really fucking creepy, like in ways I did not expect. Like, just very novel mind there at play.
Yeah.
Let's see.
And he was such a howling racist.
And that, yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. Complex people, I guess, making interesting artwork, I know, in spite of it. Yeah, there's a lot of themes at play there for sure.
You know, they say talent has no prereqs. Like, talent is talent. Like, you can have talent and come from a lot of different backgrounds with a lot of different belief sets, I suppose you can say. Like, you can find talent amongst all groups. So, you know, you can always try to enjoy the talent and what the talent produces, and then find out later that maybe you don't always agree with the person who had the talent. So it's a divide that's sometimes hard to struggle with, but it's always there.
Let's see, we got another question here. Go ahead.
How you guys come up with the idea of the Orpheus app?
That was a lot of brainstorming after we decided that it was time to wrap up Wraith. And they wanted to keep on playing that playground, but do something that was perhaps a little more accessible. And so they did it as that limited series. But there was a lot of, okay, we've wrapped up this. How do we approach it from a different direction now? And Lucian Soulbound, again, great work there.
Well, there we go. So, yeah, I mean, that was a kind of a cool part in the World of Darkness, too, is that, you know, when all the lines came to an end, they had a chance to restart and go a different direction with everything. You know, I imagine having that freedom to kind of reinvent the wheel was pretty liberating after being, you know, used to the world of, you know, massively interlaced backstory, you know, meta plots and everything else. Mm-hmm. But also, I guess you have less pieces to work with off the top. Did you find a preference for one over the other?
It was fun playing with all the toys in the sandbox. I really enjoyed that, and I loved how organically the World of Darkness grew. Mm-hmm. You know, some of that was developers sort of bouncing off one another, saying, "Okay, you're going here, then I'm going here." Some of it was divvying up territory. Some of it was just, oh, I found this really neat historical character and nobody else has them. And so it grew organically, it grew wildly, and it grew out of control, but in a way that made sense because it was never... We never had a draft for historical figures. We never did formal rules for, okay, you get this, you get that. Mm-hmm. It was see what the books demand and make sure that you're not stepping on each other's toes, and away we went from there.
Do you have a favorite historical figure that you were able to pull in?
I have a picture of Rasputin hanging on my wall. Of course, everybody had Rasputin, but I have the Bill Spencer sketch from Guild Book Puppeteers.
Mm-hmm. Man, that guy. If ever there was a story that needed to be turned into something in the World of Darkness, that was it, for sure. Like, if you don't know that story, as somebody in the chat, go read about it. It is it literally is unbelievable in some parts. Like, that dude lived an interesting life and had an interesting death, for sure. Man. So, like, some of the other stuff you worked on, obviously, there was a lot of La Sombra element there. Mm-hmm. And I was remembering, we were talking in an earlier episode about the book series of novels that came out. And if I'm not mistaken, you did the La Sombra book. Is that correct? Yeah, man, that was a good one. Correct. Like, because it was an interesting series, because every book was, well, I don't know if every book, but most of the books were written by different authors, passing along this ongoing story that was developing through the course of it. Like, did you guys all get to read each other's works before you sat down on yours, or was it kind of like everybody kind of building, and then you're just hoping you dovetailed in at the end?
There's a lot of, oh my God, the deadline's when? Others of us, a couple of the books got switched around in order because some authors were moving faster than others. I remember I finished up La Sombra, and I was asked if I could provide an excerpt for Ventru, and I said, how long do you need? And they said 35,000 words. It's coming in kind of short. And I'm like, that's no,
35,000 words. Whew.
That's not an excerpt. That's cleaving down the middle. That
is,
man.
It's something that's interesting, though, when you think about, like, because in the modern time, when you see people working on creative stuff this way, when you take something like what they're doing with, like, the writers groups for, like, Star Wars, and they're like, how are they ever going to get all that continuity to all fit? And you look back, you're like, well, there were people who were doing this sort of thing with World of Darkness, like, 20 years ago. Like, it was like this. It should not be something that is thought of as that impossible or uncommon to do. But so I mean, it's interesting to see that many creative people working in one line, I guess, where I think most of the time when we think of lines of books now, you think of like with Game of Thrones, right? Where he's doing all the books himself and we have to wait for him to put another book out. Whereas at those times, like so much got produced because it was in so many different hands. But was it hard to keep everything in your mind then as you're trying to work on the next book after so many years start to go by with content creep, I guess?
The good thing was that you could always just walk over to the next cube and say, hey, I got a question about this, and generally get an answer. And if the person you were talking to didn't know the answer, we at least had all the books there so we could go digging.
Going to the archives.
It was like doing like research projects at work. Like you had to go to the library, and was there like a librarian who kept all the books?
I had a library in my cube. I had a giant bookshelf full of books on the Dark Ages that I left behind when I left White Wolf, and it was painful for me to leave that many books behind, but I did.
Wow. And then there was some other interesting things that sounded like they happened in that office. You were going to tell us a story at the beginning before we came on air, but apparently it was something to do with Justin Achilles.
Oh, yes. I'm probably getting in trouble in this one, but there were a lot of people who walked around the office in bare feet, which was deeply unsanitary and kind of hippie-ish. And Justin felt this was unprofessional, so he started warning people that if they didn't start wearing shoes, he was going to show up one day wearing no pants. And by God, he did.
Nobody was checking the company emails back then, huh? So he...
He couldn't take that sort of thing seriously. I mean, I sort of straddled the line. I would walk around in my socks, but not in bare feet. And
well, that's one way to get your point across. You know, that probably set a different tone in the office.
It was a different time then, and different things happened.
Now, I know that from our Vampire LARP, from the years that we did Vampire LARP, there were a lot of characters that some of our fellow Vampire LARPies went on to work in a lot of other industries or whatever, and they took some of those characters and put them into other forms of media. Have you had any characters from your games that you put into Wraith or that you put into your works where it was like this was a character that played in the game, and then you took that story and used it for any of the books that you put out?
I haven't taken anybody from the Wraith setting simply because they are so much of the Wraith setting.
True.
I did steal a character from a video game that I worked on for a novel once, but don't tell anybody that.
We won't ask which one then. We won't get in trouble.
So we got another question from Joker here. Would you be open to the possibility of a Wraith 5th edition, considering V5 and the upcoming W5?
Oh, God. Wraith 20 nearly killed me. The Wraith curse is real. I make no bones about that fact. The Wraith curse is real, and that project nearly killed me.
Oh, boy.
I started working on it, and the first thing that happened was I got made lead writer on the Tom Clancy's The Division, which sucked up all my time immediately. Then my mother got cancer. My mother died. My wife left me. My cat died. Just various and sundry things. Just absolutely everything in my life went wrong for a couple of years while I was struggling with that book. And I did my best with it, and I'm proud of what came out. I am deeply sorry to the fans that it took as long as it did.
Understandable.
And I can tell you a ghost story that happened while I was working on it.
Wow.
I took a week down at the North Carolina shore to just rent a cabin and write, and did a lot of work on the book then. And I was working on one of the chapters, and I stopped typing, and the keyboard kept on typing.
What? Oh, boy.
First that I type appeared on the screen.
Okay. Wow. All right. What did it say?
Well, I was going to say, yeah, what did it say?
You're going to laugh.
I'm ready.
It said more beer.
It said what?
More beer.
Oh, man.
No, was this something that fit in the sentence at the time? Or
I have no idea where that came from. I had a bottle of scotch with me. I didn't have any beer with me.
So did you make a beer run?
I was a little too spooked to, honestly.
Yeah, I would say.
I would have been a little too spooked not to at that point.
Oh, man, that's wild. Like, I'm trying to think of, like, was it like slow typing? Was it like letter by letter, or was it just like auto completion kind of style?
It was slow typing.
Oh, God. That's okay. So before I was like, okay, it's an autocorrect thing, no big deal. Slow typing.
It was just creepy.
Have you had other haunting experiences that seem to be guiding your hand into developing Wraith?
I do have a haunted book.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with the author Manly Wade Wellman. He was a fantasy young adult historical author, lived in Chapel Hill, wrote a lot of fantasy that was derived from Appalachian folklore.
Oh, okay.
And I'm a big collector of his books. And I was at the Raleigh Library sale one day. Raleigh would do these massive book sales for their libraries. And I found one of his books, and I picked it up, and I realized it was one that I already had, so I put it back down, wedging it carefully in with the others.
Mm-hmm.
And, sorry, Mr. Wellman, so you have to go home with someone else. And I turned around, I took 2 steps, and I heard a whap. And I turned back around, and the book was on the floor. And I said, okay, that's odd. And I picked the book back up, and I shoved it back in. I made sure there was no one around. And I took my 2 steps, and whap! Book's on the floor again. So I picked it back up very carefully, put it down very carefully, backed away, made sure there's nobody within 20 feet, turned around, wham.
Wow.
So I bought the book immediately. The book's
Is it there behind you on your shelf right now? Do you still have it?
I do, in fact, still have it. I keep it in my office. It was actually on my desk when I wrote my first independent novel, Firefly Rain.
Nice. Excellent.
Now, if you walk away from the bookcase, does it still fall to the floor?
No, it's happy here.
It's happy.
There's so many Manly Wade Wellman books in this house that it has company.
Yeah, it's found its resonance. It's ready. It's at peace. Oh man. Yeah, that would creep me out. That there is no lie there. That'd be hard to explain. That's an oddball one. Yeah, there was the chat saying that book is like a cat. It adopted you. Yeah.
Yep.
So
That's amazing.
Obviously, you've done a lot of work. You just mentioned your novel there. So, like, people in the chat who may not have come across it, can you tell a little bit about that?
Okay, well, I've actually published 7 novels and a short story collection. 2 of the novels are original. One is Firefly Rain, which is a ghost story set in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
It's about what happens when you come home after you didn't keep your promises.
Yeah, that's nice.
So that got a PW Starred review, and it was a Book Sense pick, and very proud of it.
Congratulations.
And the other one is called Vaporware, and it is a video game ghost story.
Ooh.
The idea of what happens when a video game doesn't want to get canceled.
Oh. The game itself.
And there's a lot of passion and energy and devotion that goes into making a video game, and seeing that energy fueling something that wants what it wants, made for an interesting story.
They definitely take on a life of their own. I mean,
oh man, chat says Duke Nukem Forever, the true story. Yeah.
Neither confirm nor deny.
Confirm nor deny.
Oh man, God, yeah, that's got to be tough. Like we've known a lot of game developers, as Volition was in the town where we spent most of our college years, and so you kind of got to see like a little bit of the behind the scenes of video game making and like the development cycle and like the unbelievable amounts of pressure at the end for bug testing and all that. And I cannot imagine how difficult that must be to work that hard on something and then have it pulled at the last minute. Like that's got to be heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had many of those experiences personally, or is it a book more of just like talking about somebody else's issue there?
It's more talking about other folks' issues. I've been around the industry for a long time, and I've got a lot of friends who have seen a lot of things and whom I've bought a lot of drinks for. And so I've heard the stories.
I can imagine.
It's certainly a tough industry to work in, just in general. Like everyone I know that's been in the industry will tell you it's a tough industry just to get into and stay in is incredibly hard. So I guess congratulations on being able to do that for as long as you have.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Now, in terms of that, not getting into specifics of any particular game or game line, what are the aspects of that you find most fulfilling?
Working with a team to build something that people have fun with.
Mm-hmm.
That is the alpha and the omega of it. That my job is to help people have fun.
Mm-hmm. And it's got to be a very interesting departure from other mediums that you have worked in. Like we talk about this a lot in other episodes about how storytelling is different depending on what your media is. Like when you're in control of everything in the written form, that's one style. When you have a visual media, it's a whole different thing. And when you have an interactive media, it's a different type of story altogether.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, like were those constraints in some ways beneficial for creativity?
It depends on where you're going with it and what creative aspects you're trying to foster. I mean, the joke is that I write fiction because the characters do what the hell I want them to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see.
I guess at the end of the day, like, do you consider yourself a storyteller still in those regards? Like, while you're working for, no matter what media you're in, is that something that it's always that you're drawn to? Is that ability to tell a story?
Very much so. I am incredibly lucky to have had the chance to tell stories in different media, and that I've had people appreciate the work that I've done in those different media. And I'm going to keep on doing it as long as I can.
Catching up with chat here real quick.
Yeah, Malice conspiracy. Malice worked in the video game industry, as I say. Still remembers Tom Dowd telling him, "Whatever you do, don't get into the game industry." And he got to work. He worked in the game industry for a couple of MMOs.
Yeah, he worked on Camelot Unchained, or not Camelot Unchained. I totally brain fart on that one. Not that one. He worked on Warhammer. There we go.
Warhammer.
Yeah, same company, I think. Yeah, so like, I'm not actually sure what is it you do specifically in game design. Like, what's your role?
I'm a writer.
Okay, so you're a writer there as well. Yeah, that's got to be a really different style. Because if you're writing, are you writing primarily like like dialogue, quest chains, just the overarching narratives, like
dialogue, story, character development, in-game artifacts, whatever they need me to do.
Mm-hmm. Chat's wondering, I mean, we know we were talking earlier about not getting too specific with things, but they had questions about which video games you've done writing for, if you could talk about that.
Sure. The last 3 Splinter Cell games are ones that I've written. The Division and the Division 2. The Crew 2, Driver San Francisco, a fair number of Ghost Recon and Rainbow Six games, Dark Messiah of Might and Magic.
Mm-hmm. Man,
the list is long. I've been doing it for a while.
Some very successful titles there. That's good ones to be associated with.
Do you feel like there was a lot of skill sets that came from your time in the TTRPG industry that benefited you in the video game industry?
Yes, very much so. The difference being that tabletop is all about expanding. You give the players material and tell them to run free with it and build the world outside of that. Mm-hmm. While video games, you want to keep things closed to what is available for the players to do.
Yeah. God, yeah, that's a very difficult thing to deal with, I would imagine. You can't just allow people just kind of roam freely, go over the next hill, see what's over there, because some poor guy.
I would imagine
it's all great.
I don't know if you ever do anything like this or not, but like when you think about the way that like modules or story paths are written, that feels more like video game writing, right? Like, here's the rails, keep the story heading this direction. Don't wander off too far, and you won't realize that there's a coded wall you can't walk past. Is that something that you found after doing like video game work where you think you could go back to maybe titles and create like actual like adventure paths for? I know World of Darkness didn't really ever have adventure paths, which is kind of strange, but for
I can certainly do that. The game writing is so diverse these days that it's, you know, you can do anything in video game writing these days, from open world to really, really tightly drawn rails.
Yeah, I guess in those terms, like since you've got experience doing this, do you have any advice for people who are trying to, you know, for our audience is probably running games, to allow the sense of openness in spite of actually constraining options down? Is there a way that you can really pull that off? Any tricks that go along with that?
The trick is flexibility and not reflexively saying, "Oh my God, no!" So when a player comes up and pulls the rug out from under your feet, that gigantic Villains and Vigilantes game that I ran, a player came up with the perfect solution to a problem that would have shortcutted roughly 6 months worth of plot.
Oh,
wow. And I had to think on my feet and allow him to get something as a reward for his cleverness, and while not derailing all the fun for all the other people.
That's
not to mention all the.
That's funny on the side of the Titanic, right? And having to patch that hole up real fast. You just hit an iceberg.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, flexibility is definitely key. You know, we've talked a lot about improvisation being a skill that you really have to develop if you know you're going to be sitting on that side of the table. Just because, yeah, players take you all over the place. You never know where they're going to go. And yeah, I feel like the more you just the more you do it, you know, the more you write, the more you create games, the more you run things at the table, I would imagine the easier it gets to navigate those spaces. You know, like the familiarity of it. And not feeling that like instant panic in your heart. You know?
Yeah, the more experience you have with just thinking on your feet, the better off you are. And you only get that from being forced to think on your feet by players who are collectively smarter than you are.
That's a hard thing to accept sometimes, that the players are collectively smarter than you are, but it's almost always true. And if you just give them that opportunity, they will push the edges of those boundaries, and they will show you that they had a better plan than you did all along if you just let them go with it.
And then the trick is just go with it and see where it takes you.
Yeah, find the story. You know, where it goes. Like it takes its own life, I guess, at that point. You know, it just ventures out and becomes something new.
Yeah, that's why my campaigns were very heavily character driven. So when they went off the rails, I could introduce a character who could either help them jump back on the rails or who would give them something to do in that new space. I was never really tied to plot so much as I was the interaction of characters. And
yeah, I think at the end of the day, those are some of the best stories. You know, 'cause, I mean, you know, your plots are important, but like I think that self-discovery, the analysis of man kind of stuff is the real important storytelling out there. It's the stuff that resonates the most, I guess, with me anyway.
Yep, very much so for me as well. I mean, plots are great, but at the end of the day, a plot is 6 by 6 by 3.
Yeah,
and characters are living, breathing things.
Do you consider maybe that to be? I've never thought about this until we're just kind of talking about it. Like, do you think maybe that was sort of the key to success, maybe for the World of Darkness in general, is that they didn't put out examples of gameplay. Like, they didn't put like actual adventures out there. Like, here's the rail storyline for you to sit on. They put out examples of characters. They put out story, like you said, novelizations where you could get into what the world was like, but not this is Curse of Strahd, where you go through these dungeons, you go through these steps and get these things, and here's where it ends. Like, do you think that was maybe part of the success of the World of Darkness, was that they didn't take that formula?
I think so. I think the fact that again, it was open. So you could pick and choose what parts of it you wanted to play with, which characters you wanted to play with. Chicago, the original Chicago by Night, one of the greatest source books ever written, as far as I'm concerned. Simply because there was so much in there that you could do with it. And you could ignore the parts you wanted to ignore. You had the underlying story that you could attach to or detach from if you wanted. It was just a brilliant smorgasbord of plot and character for you to pick up and run with.
Yeah, they did a really good job on that one. It's very nice. Now, for writers who may be dealing with the dreaded writer's block, do you have anything that really works for you? Break through?
Scotch.
You say cash?
You said Scotch.
Oh, Scotch. But equally funny. I thought you said cash. I was like, all right, well, that'll do it. Just dangle it out there. Yes, go.
All joking aside, I always have multiple projects I'm working on so that if one of them runs into a roadblock, I can shift gears and go on to something else. And I try and make them a little different so that I'm not trying to tread the same ground over and over again. I mean, I did hit a titanic case of writer's block working on my last novel, which is I'm currently editing it and hopefully going to send it out soon. But I hit massive writer's block literally at the halfway point.
Ooh. And
I had to put it down and read a couple of short stories before I could get back to it and figure out, okay, here's how I get around this.
And are there any particular things that kind of get you there? Like, so I know for like my creativity, sometimes it's just, don't feel creative and I can't come up with anything. But other times there's structural things that I run into that it's an impasse that I can't seem to get past from a technical side of things. Like, do you find one or the other to be kind of more prevalent?
I've never had a trouble with the technical side of things. I've had trouble when I've had all the characters mad at each other so they won't talk.
Perfect World of Darkness.
I've had cases where the characters knew where they were going and I didn't want them to go there, and the situation like that is no contest. You let the characters go where they're going.
I suppose that's probably where it's a bit different than writing for a tabletop game, right? Because whenever I hit those writer's blocks, that's usually where I set it down and I was like, the players will figure this part out for me. I don't have to get past my writer's block, because when I hit the block, I'm like, and by the time they get to there, if that even happens, they will trudge right on without me and I'll just catch up later. So do you try that aspect? Do you have somebody else come in and you're like, hey, here's where these guys are at. What would you do? And just see if do you throw that kind of concept out there, or do you go real tight-lipped on your work so you don't tell anyone?
I have friends I share my writing with, and they share their writing with me, and we beat each other about the head and shoulders with how to make our writing better. But generally, I'm pretty protective of my stuff until it's in at least semi-finished form, because the bits and pieces don't convey what's really going on.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a pretty tried and true method, though. I mean, I think C.S. Lewis and them all got together, right, when they were writing Narnia and the Lord of the Rings, right? And they were all getting together and
the Inklings, yes,
with each other and running things off each other all the time. So that's a pretty tried and true method, I suppose, in writing.
Yeah, a good writers group is a fantastic thing. I don't have a formal writers group. I just have, informal associations with folks who are kind enough to occasionally read my stuff. But a good writers group where you can get reliable feedback that is neither actually asking for somebody to tell you that their writing is good or just trying to climb to the top of the heap in the writers group. That's a rare and beautiful thing. And if you can find a writers group like that, hang on to it for dear life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess that brings us right back to what we were talking about at the beginning with Wraith. It's you got to have a lot of trust, and you have to have the right group to really make something work well.
I do have one other little bit of Wraith lore and a question that's boggled my mind for for decades, and I don't know if it ever came out or anything, but vampire started with, at least for the World of Darkness, it started with Cain. It was the first vampire. Now, lore-wise, the first wraith was Sharon. Did they ever identify exactly who Sharon was?
No, but the Lady of Fate was Eve.
Mm-hmm.
Lady of Fate was Eve.
Interesting.
If you read the fiction in Ends of Empire, there's a little throwaway line where she mentions that she wishes her son would get done with his business already.
Huh. Wow. See, that's the thing about the World of Darkness books. You can like read through them for days and days and days, and you just come across like one throwaway line. You're like, wait a minute. There's an entire story arc here that's hidden in this one sentence. Like, let's go explore that. See, I think we were always on the page of thinking it was Abel.
Yeah, that's what I was curious, as if it ever, because it was like he was like the first wraith, and I was like, well, it makes sense if it was Abel, but they never did come out and say it one way or the other. But I was always just curious if that was ever like baked in there somewhere, if it was ever known who Sharon was.
It was never baked into the cosmology, but the Eve thing was.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
And we had a lot of really smart people writing for us and sticking a lot of those little subplots in there. You know, the land of Bruce Boss sidebars was just a wilderness to get lost in. And I say that with nothing but love for Bruce, but Bruce's stuff would come back and it would have great text, and then it would have this completely insane sidebar that was wonderful and awesome and cool, and it's like, can I use this? I don't care, I'm going to.
Oh, lovely. So Joker has another question here before we kind of hit the wrap-up point. He was kind of wondering, I guess we're all dealing with COVID, obviously. He's wondering how that may have changed your writing process, if at all.
It has made me think a lot more about what I'm writing. The fiction that I've written during the epidemic has largely been set before, but now that's starting to shift.
Interesting.
And it's also changed the way that I've dealt with other writers. I mean, normally I go to writers' conferences, I go to video game conferences, I see folks in person, I talk. You know, it's a community, and I'm a part of that community, or those communities really, because the video game writers are over here and the horror writers are over here, and and I value my time with those communities, and I value my time with those people, because they are some of the best and brightest folks that I know. And not having a chance to meet up with them personally, you know, it's all fun and games on the Zoom chat, but it doesn't quite replace the flesh and blood moments.
Yeah, it's been a tough time for a lot of people. For everyone, it's changed their lives and the way they interact. And, you know, for a lot of us gaming, you know, everyone's using the, you know, virtual tabletops these days and Zoom and stuff. And there is something just subtly different there. The same conversation doesn't feel the same. You know,
order to share pizza.
Yeah, exactly. Share the meal together. I guess I just didn't appreciate how important that was before that. And if there is any silver lining to this whole thing, I think it's that you know, this close to Thanksgiving, I can recognize what I'm thankful for in the times we had before, and know where I should be aiming to get back to. You know, once these things clear up.
I mean, could you imagine the Spanish flu? There was no Zoom. There was no internet. Like, they masked up and literally had to stay in their houses. Like, talking about isolation. Like, I guess that's really what's been eye-opening for me, is like we talk a lot about how COVID has affected us, and you're right. There's things like the conventions we don't have. There's a lot of guidelines that we're all trying to live by and everything right now. Like, but I think like we still have way more opportunity now than what people who had to deal with similar pandemics had to deal with in the past. Like, we are fortunate to still have what we have, to be able to sit here right now and have this conversation. We couldn't have done during the time of the Spanish flu. So, you know, Right. A lot of times during these times, we think about what we don't have. And I think what we're seeing out there in the world right now is people innovating and finding ways to realize what we do have and still using it. We have virtual tabletops where we can sit down and play Wraith, where we can sit down and they're putting entire conventions online now. To fill the void, not completely, but to fill that void at least a little bit to keep things kind of moving. So there's kind of two ways I think you can kind of approach the way that this whole thing's going down. So I think it's interesting to see the innovation that comes out of something like this.
I think it's pushed a lot of people towards seeking communities of their own too. Not just becoming part of a community, but making a community their own. Like I don't know if I remember that as much in years past, but in the last couple, it seems like there's a big push for that. And we've been, thankful and great, having this chance to do these shows for people on Twitch here and on YouTube and all that kind of stuff to meet a lot of people, to get to know them, introduce them to other people that we know, and see those relationships kind of flourish. It's been a treat. It's been really meaningful. It's been probably the only thing keeping me sane this last year. And again, it's good to take the time to recognize and be appreciative for what we have.
So let's wrap up with the just in a nutshell. Go back to Wraith a bit here as we wrap up. And if you could give your one sales pitch line to people, like, hey, if this is the story that you need to tell, this is the story you want to tell with Wraith. Like, what kind of stories are best fit for Wraith, and why should they play Wraith?
The best story is always your story. And Wraith is designed to tell your story.
Very nice. Very nice. So, folks, I went ahead and linked his website down there for you. So we got the richarddansky.com for those of you that are watching this on YouTube. You'll see that down in the description. Are there any other places people should look for you? Any ways to support you directly?
I'm on Twitter as Safety Dansky.
Nice.
At rdansky.
Great handle.
And yeah, thank you. I just keep myself out there. I'm always happy to talk to folks. Ping me and let's chat.
Absolutely. And thank you so very much for taking the time to come talk with us today and to share these things with our audience. It's been a very pleasant conversation, and learned a lot. Learned a lot of things that we maybe didn't know ahead of time coming into this. And it's an honor to get to meet somebody who was instrumental in something that we have taken and made such an important part of our lives. Thank you.
Well, it has been a pleasure to be here, gentlemen. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, we're glad you're able to take time to be here with us tonight. Jeff, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what we got going on the rest of the week here at TTPKB.
Yeah, we got a busy schedule ahead of us, as we always do. So if those of you who are watching us in the chat, go ahead and look down below us. You'll see our panels that have all of our lineup, our shows, which kind of go in chronological order. Monday nights, of course, are Wisdom Check, where we'll be talking with somebody. Do we have the Skinny on our next guest?
Fun fact, I have not booked any more guests for the rest of the year yet.
Okay.
Don't you worry.
Maybe a duo session there again.
We have a couple that I've been waiting on dates for. We have our other friend who is an artist for Magic the Gathering. I know that we're trying to pin down the date. And also, I cannot think of his name off the top of my head, but contact with a guy who's doing the TSR museum up in Lake Geneva. They got the original TSR building, and he was wanting to wait till December to see what more progress would be done before it comes on the show. So I've got a few people, and I've been waiting to get dates from them before I start talking to a few other people that I know I can get put in about any week I need them. So that's why there's not a current guest list for the rest of the year. So that's what's up with that at the moment. So
we'll dig into something if we don't have somebody. Those are always fun sessions too. So Tuesdays, that is Cam's day. He has been recently doing his Bardic Knowledge show, where he puts together music and shows you all the technical ins and outs of how he is constructing his songs that we are using on our channel. So when we do our sessions, we get to have a nice musical backdrop. And he's been doing some really cool stuff there. Wednesday night, this week is a Don't Starve, is that right?
All flesh must be eaten.
Yeah.
Don't sleep.
So we are going, mixing game names in there. This is...
I got you straight, Jeff.
Thank you.
Don't worry, I'm here for you.
It's our zombie apocalypse survival game that we're playing that you guys get to be very interactive with. So you get to go and throw bits at us and ruin our night. And so please stop in and say hi to us then and make fun of us as we inevitably die in 2 or 3 minutes into the game session.
If you throw dollars at us, we'll die for your amusement. And if you throw quarters, parts of zombies will show up to try to kill us, apparently. We didn't know this. That's a thing that happens. So
people love that. Thursday nights, we have been typically doing video game stuff. So I might stream a little Dead by Daylight. We'll see how that goes. Friday we take off. Saturday this week is 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, our Everstorm campaign. So come check that out. We are deep into some awesome stuff there. And Levi puts on a good show. Anything else I'm missing?
I am busy casting not 1, not 2, but 3 games currently that are going to be coming up here on our stream. The first one, I believe, is going to maybe start next month, and that's going to be the first of my 2 Zweihander games. I'm going to be doing a run of Bitter Harvest and Something About Marie, the 2 preset adventures from the backs of the revised core rulebook and Main Gauche, the supplement.
Mm-hmm.
I have both of those adventures. I have both of those adventures already set up on Roll20. There's no work for me except to get players, get them in there, and put it up there. So that's going to happen. I'm working on casting those. And then in January, my 3rd of my own homebrew campaign, Vigilantes of Valandria, will take place using Zweihander system starting sometime in late January, probably. And I almost ready for the cast reveal on that.
Nice.
Which I'll be revealing that at our Horan Huttenberg cast reunion on the 29th of this month, the Sunday. Jeff and the rest of the cast who is part of Horan Huttenberg will hopefully all be able to get back together, and we'll talk about everything that went down in that campaign, which just ended a couple weeks ago. All those episodes are up on our YouTube, and you can find them all there. So those are things to look forward to. I had a lot of positive feedback, both from Horan Huttenberg and people wanting to get involved in the next campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So I had enough people that I've been able to create 2 games. So that's what I'm going to be doing. One for maybe people who are newer and getting into it, then people who I know are more experienced role players. I'm kind of going to leave to the longer campaign. So I think that's what we're going to do going forward. And then, of course, the 3rd game, I didn't mention it, but I'm bringing Vampire the Masquerade to the channel. We're going to play some Vampire, some tabletop rules. My guys here are jumping at the bit to get to play Vampire again, so we're going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't decided which edition. They have a love for the old editions. I may have, like I said, I was on Amazon trying to find an old book to replace mine because I want to use those old editions. I'll take a look at V5 and we'll decide if that's where route we want to go or not. But it may be the old school one that we all know and love. So
excellent.
That's what you got to look forward to coming up in the next couple months here at Tabletop to Keyboard on top of our regular schedule.
Perfect. Well, let's load up the bus and let's take our party to someone else's channel, show some love, see if you got one in the works there. Each week we try to streamline our ending down. It's still unbelievably long with all the amount of stuff we do, but we got there.
It's bigger all the time. Today we're going to go visit an old friend we haven't seen in a while. We're going to go talk to our buddy Scuzz Nugget.
Oh, nice.
So hang on here. We're going to drop some viewers here on Scuzz Nugget. There he is. He's playing Dungeons and Dragons tonight. So
fantastic.
Go say hi to him.
All right, everyone. As we load the bus, thank you very much. We'll see you next time.
Go tell Scuzz that TT2KB sent you.